Thank you, David. Well, thank you, Mario, for the invitation. I was really glad when Mario asked me to break the ice by asking a few questions. I had the privilege of working with David in one of the workshops that Oscar mentioned at the beginning, and I soon came to admire your both your tenacity as head of our workshop and also your generosity when facilitating our access, my access, for instance, when I needed help to study or to research in the US. So I was really glad to be able to ask you a few questions and discuss a little bit with you about your papers. And well, congratulations on the cátedra, on the chair. And I think that's really a sign of how much your research and you mean for this school. And we'll be glad to hear your opinion. The questions I wanted to ask you are mainly, I came to these questions due to the process we are stuck in right now of preparing our PhD application. And we are in the middle of a debate among the faculty, and I thought that it would be a really good opportunity for us to profit from your research and your experience, your larger experience in the field. So my questions are related to a few methodological points about this, what you call the field of law and development, and we are trying to establish that as a research line here at our postgraduate program. I have only two questions, and then I think we could move on to the broad discussion. The first question concerns what you call the field of law and development. I mean, you used this word in your presentation and also in your text. You hinted in one of the footnotes that that could be a tricky concept, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about it. If I understand correctly, what holds law and development together as a field of study are mainly three factors. First, funding. I mean, you need funding agencies, and you mentioned for the Fund Foundation, USAID, and later the World Bank, and how these funding mechanisms changed along the way. The second factor would be agents, academics, international organizations, all of them moved by some kind of moral commitment to bring development to the third world or to developing countries, what we call today. You mentioned, for instance, emancipation, last slide, this moral or this broader commitment to bring in development to other parts of the world from, and this would be the third factor, from the US. Both your presentation and your papers they deal with law and development as a field of study as part of a movement or a sector of American legal academia. And my question is, when we try to transport, or when we try to think about law and development here in Brazil, one of the problems that I see is that I'm not sure if these three factors hold together for a field of study. I don't know if they're correct. I don't know if we would agree with that. But the thing is that, for instance, when you talk about the paper that you mentioned, Scholars in Self-Estrangement, about this permanent field, this permanent malaise in the field of changing the funding partners, changing the institutional partners, and also the idea that the field is always coming to a sort of an end and needs to be reactivated again by new agents, by new funding agencies. Doesn't it have to do with the fact that maybe there's not so much clarity about what law and development actually means as an object, as a subject matter of scholarship, of study? I ask this because, of course, you could say that, well, and some of the definitions appear in your presentation and also in the papers. You could say that law and development is simply the study of the role of law in facilitating or as an instrument of promoting development or economic change abroad. or in the third world or in developing countries. The problem is that this definition is very close to being tautological, because development and law appear on both sides of the definition and of the statement. What is actually the subject matter? What is the object of law development as a scholarship, as a field of scholarship? This would be the first question. And the second question is, the first text that came to my mind when I was reading your presentation and when you sent me the slides and also the papers, the first text that came to my mind was this essay by Max Weber, Objectivity in Social Sciences and Social Policy. 1904, I know that you have you dedicated a lot of attention to Weber and study. You have very interesting papers about the relation, always studying, focusing on the relationship between law and capitalism. But the methodological Weber struck me right away as an interesting point of departure for asking you the second question, which is the relationship between the empirical research and the normative ideal of development. Well, Weber was addressing this question in 1904 because of they were starting a new journal, and they had to explain why social economics was a separate field of study, a distinct field of study. And one of the key issues was separating between value judgments and what was actually objective empirical research on in the social sciences. And I took one of the passages from Weber just to quote, because I think it's really interesting. I think it relates a lot to our my head is already laughing. It relates a lot to our own discussion here at the faculty. Just allow me a brief quotation. The distinctive characteristic of a problem of social policy, and you just have to substitute social policy for development, is indeed the fact that it cannot be resolved merely on the basis of purely technical considerations which assume already settled ends. Normative standards of value can and must be the objects of disputes and in a discussion of a problem of social policy, because the problem lies in the domain of general cultural values. And the conflict occurs not merely, as we are too easily inclined to believe today, between class interests, but between general views on life and the universe as well. The more general the problem involved, that is, in this case, the broader its cultural significance, the less subject it is to a single unambiguous answer on the basis of the data of empirical sciences, and the greater the role played by value ideas and the ultimate and highest personal axioms of belief. The fate of an epoch which has eaten of the tree of knowledge is that it must know that we cannot learn the meaning of the world from the results of its analysis, be it ever so perfect. It must rather be in a position to create this meaning itself. It must recognize that general views of life and the universe can never be the products of increasing empirical knowledge, and that the highest ideals which move us most forcefully are always formed only in the struggle with other ideals which are just as sacred to others as ours are to ourselves. Development is such an ideal. So how do we separate, how do we distinguish between these normative ideals that vary culturally so strongly, so significantly, to our standards of scientific objectivity, which you mentioned in your paper, for instance, in the first crisis of the movement, when you had the feeling of lacking empirical knowledge and a robust theoretical framework. How do you see this relationship between empirical research and the normative ideals that are represented by different conceptions of development?
Good questions. Thank you very much. And who's next? I'm joking. Seriously, I think these are really good questions. And the answers to the first helps perhaps lead to the answers, or at least a cut at the answers to the second. So first, I'm not sure it is a field. In fact, I think one could argue that my analysis suggests it's not a field. This is an issue that we would have to debate at some length, what is indeed a field. But I think at this moment, if you think of a field, let's take the Law and Society field. I think they have a canon. There'd be a disagreement among people, but you'd come up with 20 articles or books that are accepted as canonical. They have meetings. There are organized events around the world. There are laws. They have different names. In Britain, it's called socio-legal studies. In Japan, it's called the sociology of law. But you know, it's all the same sort of thing. They meet. There's the Law and Society meeting, which is the largest and most international. The last meeting, which was in Mexico City, had 2,700 people from, I think, like 70 different countries. And people from Latin America outnumbered people from, counting Mexico, from North America. So that's a field. And they have 6 journals, maybe, that are recognized internationally as the journals in the field. That's what I would call a field. And they debate with each other. There's great cleavages, there's disagreements, there's methodological, normative, all these things. But they're engaged. There's an engagement. The whole point of my talk is this doesn't exist. If it ever did in law and development, it doesn't exist now. And I'm not sure it should, or it could. So if that's what you mean by a field, I don't think law and development is a field. Now, there are some interesting developments that I just learned about. There was a meeting in Antwerp like 2 weeks ago where a group of universities largely from Europe formed a new global network on law and development. I'm waiting for Sarah, who was there, to give me a full report because I haven't really, all I know is this fact. So somebody's trying to do some field-like organizational infrastructure building. But I don't know whether that would go anywhere or whether it would relate to anything that you would feel is relevant. I don't know enough. So it's not a field. And to the extent that it is an ongoing academic enterprise in the United States, I'm just going to stay, or just stay for the United States, none of the factors that you mentioned are essential. There's no longer any money coming from any agencies to fund law and development work in American universities. None.
Today.
Today. None. So it's no longer, I mean, that's way back in the past. There hasn't been that kind of support for decades. The work is done by people who follow independent academic trajectories. For one reason or another, they have developed expertise on some country that is in the global south, China. Look at the University of Wisconsin. So leaving me aside, there are faculty members who have deep expertise and indeed lived for many years in South Africa, China, Korea, Russia, India. Right? And these are people who follow academic trajectories related to their engagement with these parts of the world. They don't, in fact, none of them call it, oh, and Chile. None of them call it law and development. They call it human rights. They call it, well, John Onosorts calls it law and development. So there's one who uses the law and development. But the rest use some other rubric. And they do or don't communicate with each other about this, but they are deeply embedded in doing the kind of work that I described. But it's part of the cleavage world. It's part of the fragmentation world. But it's deeply embedded in the academic mission. They do their research paid for by the university like anybody else. Maybe they'll get a grant from the National Science Foundation or something like that, but it's not for law and development, it's for social science on law. And there really is no organized sector in the United States. My notes say it's really a sector of U.S. legal academia. You can't find it. Go look for it. You cannot find it. So, you know, there are courses. So many law schools teach a course. And Wisconsin does. I participated in the course at NYU. It's taught every 2 years. It's called Law and Development. But it's, you know, it looks at all these different issues. That's what they call it. So I think that the idea that there's some strong integrated North American perspective today that, you know, you need to encounter as a kind of hegemonic force in law and development, there may be hegemonic influences, but it's not packaged that way anymore. You know, and there would be no agreement among those people who do it, who claim they're doing it. So I'm just thinking of 3 people: Kevin Davis, who you probably know, who's been here several times, and I taught a class with him this year. John Onesor, who's been here, and you know, he has one view, and he's interested in one set of issues, and me. So we would agree that we ought to talk about the issue. We wouldn't agree on any sort of definition of the field. Okay. On the question of the normative and the empirical, well, I mean, welcome to the world. I mean, that's the problem. That's the issue. I certainly hold out no hope. And if I've ever led anyone to think that empirical study by itself is going to answer normative policy questions, forget it. I mean, I'm as steeped in Weber as you are. But the 2 kinds of analyses, the value analysis and the empirical analysis, have to go together, because often it's empirical analysis of value-related questions. So in determining what you study and what questions you want to know, you're going to have value questions. So one of the students, we were talking yesterday about how you study, or what should be done about trying to study what's happened with the aspirational aspects of the Brazilian Constitution, social and economic rights, and things that are purely aspirational, developmental visions, if you want to call them that. Okay, those are normative ideas, social and economic rights. Okay, so we were talking about litigation to get judicial enforcement of the right to health, which I just know there is such a thing. Never read the literature, but I've heard somebody describe it. So there's an area where the right to health, I mean, what the right to health, that isn't something that is self-defining, so there's normative analysis. What do we mean by this? What do we want it to mean? But then the question is, okay, if we even have some understanding, then, you know, people are litigating. What is happening? Are they winning? Why are they winning? Are they losing? Why are they losing? If they win, what happens? Is this actually good? There are people I know who think it's not good because of a complicated set of reasons. These are all deeply normative and empirical questions that get fused. You have to be able to do both. So Weber's right. Weber did a lot of empirical work. So I don't see that, you know, I don't see anything in the current academic traditions that are part of this sort of imagined, expanded, exploded law and development world that I envision when I list all these specialties and all these cleavages. I don't think that in this world you've got people who naively think that if you just do empirical work, you'll answer the questions. I just don't think it's there. Or maybe it's there, but forget it. You don't want any part of it.
Eu proponho que nós paremos aqui com esse debate e voltemos a esse debate no final de amanhã, porque nós temos uma última mesa amanhã para discutir Line Development Properly. E eu estou um pouco preocupado com o horário, então a gente para por aqui. Infelizmente eu não abro para perguntas, mas a gente volta para as perguntas no final do dia de amanhã. E aí pediria já para que nós seguíssemos para a próxima mesa. Enfim, as pessoas fiquem à vontade para aqui se servirem de café e pão de queijo ao longo da mesa. E eu já, então, pediria para agradecer, eu já agradeço já ao professor David Trubeck, aos comentários do Tiago,